The Byte Show is listener supported at thebyteshow.com.
Hello, everybody. This is GeorgeAnn Hughes, and this is The Byte Show. And it is a real blessing to have with us Joseph P. Farrell.
Again,
yeah. Yeah, and we are going to talk about the Philosopher's Stone and the magic of social engineering. Oh, Joseph, there is some kind of magic in this social engineering.
Yes.
Because it is so widespread.
Well, yes. We hinted at that in the first two sessions, and
yes.
particularly in the one where I mentioned that there is a direct effect of consciousness on the physical medium.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes.
And what we're going to get into a bit, I hope, tonight, is to take that perspective and to see how it has been used in very mild forms of social engineering. Witness this very last election that I went on my rant about in the previous session.
Yes.
And you know, I have to be upfront about that rant. About 95% of it was genuine passion. All right.
Yes.
But about 5% of it was contrived for a specific purpose, and we'll be getting into that tonight.
Okay.
But let's start with what I call the kind of mild alchemy, the mild magic of social engineering.
Okay.
If we examine that election result from another perspective, what you had boiling over was the frustration of you know, the middle of center voter.
Yes.
With both parties not being able to get anything done unless it is some loony piece of legislation that fits some sort of ideological agenda.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, this actually is a technique of social engineering. And if we look at ideologies, the ideologies of the two parties,
yes,
what we have is a kind of polarization. We've got a pair of dialectical opposites, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And they range, you know, the whole spectrum from extreme left to extreme right. And what this does, GeorgeAnn, and what people have to wake up and realize is that this is a kind of alchemy.
Okay.
Because you get two results from it. And I if you recall from my rant yesterday,
yeah,
we have an incoming group of Republithugs who, you know, on one level are proposing sane things.
Yes.
You know, extending the tax cuts. I mean, my word, even President Kennedy knew that the last thing you do during a recession is raise taxes.
Yeah.
You know. So you've got some sensible things, but I also went on a rant because you have a complete lack of vision in that if you have been following the rhetoric coming out of some of the Republican leaders in the House,
mm-hmm.
they are all in favor of passing more free trade agreements.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. Now, let's just stop and consider this nonsense. So this is an ideology at work.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to try and show is that some of this is suggestively, deliberately planned. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because what you have is what I call issues division and issues entanglement. In other words, you disentangle common sense approaches to certain issues and let one party take one half of an issue and represent that, and the other party represents the other half of the issue. You follow me?
Yes.
So that what you get out of it is an ideological deadlock.
Oh.
You follow me?
Yeah.
So this has been going on now with increasing frequency really ever since Jimmy Carter became president, and then on through the Reagan era, then in Reagan-Bush era, and then into President Clinton's administration. You get these increasingly wild ideological shifts, and instead of coming closer together, the two parties are moving further apart, and you get a resulting ideological deadlock. So let's look, for example, at this health care bill. It would be absolutely ruinous to the economy.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you have certain Democratic leaders that have always pointed out that free trade is not good. It has cost us jobs.
Yeah.
All right?
Yes.
And big time, and this is no longer an issue of, well, you're either for the corporations or you're for the unions. My word, we all remember what American cars were like back in the 1970s when they had no competition. They were very poorly made.
Yeah.
Okay? But on the other hand, this doesn't mean that we ship our automobile industry to Korea and China.
Yeah.
Because it's cheaper to build them over there.
Oh.
So in other words, you get a division of issues into halves of commonsensical approaches. One party represents a common sense approach to one half of the issue, but then picks up another half of an issue and goes completely nonsensical. The Republicans, in other words, in the middle of a recession, are following the wise policy of extending these tax cuts. But on the other hand, they are not following a wise policy, in my opinion, by entering into free trade agreements or extending free trade agreements that are going to make more and more American manufacturing jobs go overseas.
Or just go away, period.
Or just go away, period.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the problem. This is why I keep saying, look at how issues are divided between the two parties and look how issues are entangled in the two parties. This is the other part of the story. Because, again, the Republicans are right, in my opinion, on health care, all right? But this is all entangled in their vision with free trade. In other words, we are dealing with an alchemy here, where ideology gridlocks real solutions. This is why I proposed space in the previous session. Because this would be something, number one, that would stimulate the economy in the Keynesian fashion that the Democrats want to pursue. But the stimulus package they passed thus far has not worked. It's, the money's disappeared and nothing has happened. Mm-hmm. So in other words, we need to consider carefully that kind of approach, but do it with something that is going to pay long-term dividends, both in technology and in long-term economic security. This is why space is important. Because philosophically, it breaks this ideological deadlock. It is a kind of social engineering, but what we're doing is we are engineering the political parties rather than letting them engineer us into a box.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah.
And it is something, I think, that both parties could agree upon. But this is a very, very key thing, GeorgeAnn, that I want the listeners to understand. When you have this kind of ideological polarization, so that common sense approaches to issues seem to be divided between the two parties, and then once they're divided, they become entangled with an issue that's completely ludicrous.
Yeah.
You see? So you have the Republicans wanting to repeal health care, but in their ideology, it's entangled with free trade in the middle of a recession, okay?
Yeah.
Looney Tunes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And on the other hand, you have the Democrats wanting to maintain that bill in its entirety, in all of its loony provisions.
Oh, boy.
And yet that's entangled with a common sense approach from some of the, I won't even mention names. People would probably stone me to death if I mentioned some of the names of the Democratic leaders that have been railing against this free trade policy for years.
Yeah.
Okay? But, this nonsensical issue is entangled with a commonsensical issue. You see?
Yeah.
So each party has, by dint of this ideological box, that they get themselves into. They've engineered a situation, their masters have engineered a situation in which each election gridlocks the fundamental issues that need to be addressed because neither party can disentangle them from those nonsensical issues. You see what's going on?
Yes.
So they're engineering a state where the people get frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
You see? And if we're not careful, it can blow up. There are some people that want that to happen. They want the system to gridlock to the point that nothing gets done, it collapses, and then they move in and impose a new one. This is social engineering at its best.
Yeah, I agree.
This is why, when I was ranting and raving, it was to a purpose. Because when we propose an issue, something that would create jobs, would benefit the nation technologically, would pay long-term investments. This is something that if you look at it closely, you could get both political parties, perhaps, to agree upon. This is kind of reverse engineering, reverse social engineering.
Yeah.
Okay, is that making sense?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So anyway, that's kind of where we're starting. Now, all of this is very important because, as I said in, I think it was the second session, the physical medium, or God, or the ether, or the vacuum flux, whatever you want to call this thing, all right,
Okay.
does respond to consciousness, or I think I said that there is a direct interface between consciousness and the physical medium.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
You have very serious physicists like Walker and even Wheeler and even Heisenberg wrote books on the implications of some aspects of the theory of quantum mechanics for consciousness.
Okay.
And let me explain why this is so important. Let's go to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's this very, very basic principle within quantum mechanics. The principle says that you cannot measure the position of an electron at the same time that you measure its velocity. So in other words, even before you set up an experiment, you have already determined the outcome by your conscious choice of what it is you are going to look for.
Oh.
Now that's a whopper.
Yeah.
This is just a tiny, tiny step away from the Hindu doctrine that the material world, as we see it, is illusion. It's a kind of a hologram that is being projected by our consciousness. It's also just a step away from some of the doctrine that falls out of the Enlightenment philosophy of Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, and then his disciple Arthur Schopenhauer.
Yes.
And in fact, Schopenhauer wrote a book, a very interesting title, The World as Will and Representation was the title of his philosophical treatise.
Oh.
You see?
Yeah.
So in other words, the physics that's coming out of Germany in the 19th and early 20th centuries has deep, deep philosophical roots. And in turn, that physics, because it has been so successful in its predictions from the theory is also saying that there is this direct link between the observer, the consciousness, and the physical medium.
Joseph, this is one reason why there's such a battle on for the thoughts, the mind.
Precisely. Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because this is exactly where I was going with this. Because the other implication of this is quantum mechanics is a statistical science. In other words, you cannot, in quantum mechanics, predict the behavior of an individual particle. And I said this in one of our Cosmic War series.
Yes.
Okay? But you can predict the aggregate behavior of a bunch of them statistically.
Yes.
And this is the same thing, I believe, that was behind the original science that lay behind the early astrological doctrines of Mesopotamia and Egypt and so on. Follow me?
Yes.
Because astrology back then was the belief in a mundane horoscope. In other words, kings had their court astrologers.
Yeah.
But the court astrologers were casting horoscopes not for the king as the individual, but for the king as the representative of the nation state.
Yeah.
Okay? So in other words, it was a prediction of the aggregate behavior of certain planets on the aggregate behavior of human beings.
Yes.
Plural, not singular.
Yes.
All right? So the bottom line then is that there is some sort of group multiplier effect on the physical medium. And let me give you an example. Prior to 9/11, the Princeton University has this experiment in consciousness going on where they have these brainwave meters all over the world, all right?
Yeah.
Very sensitive instruments that pick up on aggregate brainwave activity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, interestingly enough, before 9/11 happened, brainwave activity spiked dramatically.
Yeah.
And then spiked after it happened.
Yes.
Okay? So in other words, there was kind of a pre-action, all right? There was something present, in other words, if for want of a better expression, in the ether,
Yeah.
that the aggregate human mind, if I can use that expression, picked up on, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's get to the real alchemy of social engineering then. I should mention in this session, since we took a political turn with the previous one and are taking a political turn with this one,
Yes.
that I have a new book. It's at the publisher now. It will be published by Adventures Unlimited Press. It is called LBJ and the Conspiracy to Kill Kennedy.
Oh.
All right? And in this book, I point out certain things about the assassination based on some very interesting research that a fellow by the name of Michael Hoffman published in a book called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare.
Yeah.
If you look at certain aspects of the president's murder, the symbolism that you discover in it is very, very esoteric, and it cannot be accidental because there's too much of it.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah.
There's too much of it. It was not only a well-planned assassination,
Mm-hmm.
it was not only a deeply rooted conspiracy, but it had, at a much, much deeper level than people can imagine, had a deeply esoteric and occult basis. It was designed as an alchemical, magical working to engineer the social consciousness of the country. And the way it was done, GeorgeAnn, was to a certain extent to parade the fact that it was a conspiracy and everyone knew it, but the official version is ludicrous.
Yes.
Okay? That is a technique of social engineering and manipulation. In other words, what they're doing is saying, we got away with murder. They are literally thumbing their noses at you.
Yeah.
What you had is a secret cabal openly and brazenly step onto the stage of American political history, murder a president, and get away with it. But in planning this act, you see, they planned it so that it would have a precise effect on the group consciousness of the nation.
Mm.
That is magic.
Yes.
That is social engineering. There's little difference between the two. All right?
Okay.
Now, this brings us to a really, really difficult gruesome subject, since we are talking about alchemy and social engineering.
Okay.
We've talked about the mild kind, the kind of gridlock that we see occurring, all right?
Yes.
Now, you can look at other nations that have experienced a similar gridlock for whatever reason. In this country, we have two monopoly political parties with deeply entrenched ideological wings on the left and the right.
Yeah.
And they get more deeply entrenched with each election, and they get more deeply nutty
yes.
with each election.
That's for sure.
Okay. Like I said in the previous session, I loathe both of them equally. Maybe the Republicans a little less, but only by a few decimal points. We're not dealing with whole numbers.
Well, Joseph, even my Indian friends here said that, in essence, why vote for one devil or another? Or another,
yes. Well, this is precisely my philosophy.
Yeah.
And I've said it before. The long-term strategy that I take is you must not let them own the culture.
Yes.
Let them have everything else. Don't let them own the culture. Do everything in your power.
Okay,
what do I mean by that is do everything in your power to create islands, ever-expanding islands of culture. You quite literally go after the creative activity, the artistic activity. You produce it yourself.
Yes.
And avoid the big corporations. You avoid the popular culture. You own the high culture. Okay. It's essentially the kind of approach that was taken in Eastern Europe prior to the fall of communism. Basically, the approach was of the people that were increasingly resisting communism was they let the government just go bonkers, but they carefully and slowly chipped away at the government's control over the culture.
Yes.
Till eventually, you had a bunch of apparatchiks pushing buttons and phoning orders and so on and so forth, and nobody listened to them.
Yeah.
It just collapsed.
Yeah.
That's essentially what we're talking about. It's a very, very different approach. It's a long-term approach. It takes a lot of patience. It doesn't mean you disengage from politics or commentary or thinking about it, but you must think deeply about it. This is why we're doing this social engineering thing. And by thinking deeply, I mean, again, to stress that you have to understand social engineering is nothing but a fancy modern phrase for magic. That's all it is.
Oh my goodness!
I
never thought of it that way.
Yes, that's all it is.
Oh.
When I say that this is alchemy, I mean it. When I say that one of the precise goals that you can see clearly in the assassination of President Kennedy was to engineer a certain state of shocked, traumatized, passive consciousness within the American psyche.
Yes.
That was precisely one of its goals. How do we know this? Well, simply look at all of the occult symbolism in the assassination, and I have it in the new book, all right?
Yeah.
But if you don't want to wait for my book, then go out and buy Michael Hoffman's book, okay? You can get it on Amazon. It's called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, all right? But in any case, let's look now at the most gruesome part or the most gruesome aspect of this kind of group consciousness manipulation for the express purpose now, please understand, for the express purpose of manipulating the physical medium itself.
Okay.
All right? Now, if it is true that you can create a magical effect in the soul or psyche or ethos, if you will, of a nation with something like President Kennedy's assassination, remember what I said. Group consciousness has a multiplier effect.
Yes.
So how about murdering lots of people?
Oh, yeah.
You see what's going on?
Oh, yeah.
This is, my friends, that gruesome, dangerous reality that is lurking behind all of the 20th century's most brutal and genocidal experiments with social engineering. We call them communism, Nazism, fascism, Chinese communism. Each of these things, each of these pogroms, each of these holocausts, if you look at it from the esoteric standpoint, were designed as magical acts to create a traumatized consciousness. And please understand my next words very carefully. To create a traumatized consciousness in the physical medium.
Yes.
In the physical medium.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. This is, you know, I said this was going to be a real head bender.
Yeah.
This is why, my friends, I keep saying over and over and over and over, have positive thoughts.
Yes.
Have positive thoughts. Do not give in to apocalyptic doom and gloom, because those thoughts also interface directly with the physical medium. And group consciousness is a multiplier effect. When you are dealing with a population that has a preponderantly good, please listen to my next words carefully, a preponderantly good group consciousness, as it were, or ethos, then what do you do to change it? You shock it.
Yes.
You terrorize it. You brutalize it. This is the oldest technique in the book. You don't have to look at Marxist revolutionaries or Nazi stormtroopers or Italian fascist black shirts or Mao's Red Guards or the Soviet KGB to see this doctrine at work in ancient times with the mass deportations.
Yes.
You don't need modern revolutionary teaching to see this doctrine at work in the Inquisition.
Well, Joseph,
all you need, what you must understand, is at the surface level you need a justification that appears to be good. Oh, we're fighting heresy, or oh, we're fighting atheism, or oh, we're fighting Christianity, or what have you. You just need a scapegoat in order to commit the magical act itself.
Yeah.
But the purpose of the magical act always remains the same: to brutalize the group ethos, in turn, thereby, to brutalize the physical medium and establish your power over it. This is very, and I said it before, this is very, very dangerous stuff. And you can think I'm some sort of nutcase or what have you, but remember where I began this, and that was with the implications worked out by the physicists themselves of quantum mechanics.
Yes.
We are on the cusp, dear listeners, of a whole new, and I'm going to use that phrase advisedly, we are indeed on the cusp of a whole new age. It is unavoidable, so you might as well understand the nature, so to speak, of the philosophical beast that is taking birth right now, and has been taking birth ever since these theories began to be espoused and used successfully, with great success, in our technology in the last century. These are implications that are going to be with us in our politics, in our culture, in our daily lives. And we need to wake up and see things deeply and not superficially. Like I said, about 5% of my rage was contrived, because I want people to understand that this is partially the state they want you to be in.
Joseph, there's already, emails flying about the revolution.
Yes.
People, please.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
don't
settle down, folks.
Yeah, they don't
settle
realize once something like that gets started, it doesn't stop.
Well, what people need to understand is revolutions occur when there is a triggering event.
Yes.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Revolutions occur when there's a triggering event. And in every case that there has been such a thing, there has been an elite in the wings waiting to take over. We were extremely fortunate, and in fact the exception in this country, that the elite that took control of that revolution during the triggering event was a rather conservative one. All right? Had this been France...
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. We saw what happened in the French Revolution when you had a bunch of radicals, progressives or left-wing nutcases or whatever you want to call them. You had a bunch of radicals that seized the reins, from the previous government. And the same thing happened in Russia. You had a moderately socialist regime that took over for a few months after the Tsar abdicated.
Yeah.
But then that event was used by the Bolsheviks as the trigger event.
Yeah.
And trust me, folks, you may think people like Glenn Beck and so on and so forth are nutcases, but the literature that he's citing on his program is there. It is genuine. That's what those people are saying.
Yeah.
I've got tons of those books on my own bookshelves. So, this is something that people have to be aware of. And I'm not saying think Jonquils and Daisy's thoughts. I'm saying think good thoughts. Goodness is a deeply, deeply seated metaphysical, spiritual, philosophical, I don't know what you want to call it, but it is a deeply seated character that we have to have and adopt.
It's uplifting.
It's uplifting, but also, agreement on things in deep goodness. I don't care what particular religion or if you don't have one or, this is not what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I'm not talking about religion, all right? This is why I deliberately got very, very angry in my rant yesterday about the lack of civility that we see taking place. More, in my opinion, on the political left in this country than on the political right, although I've seen some pretty good examples of non-civility from the right, too.
Yeah.
So, again, I kind of loathe them equally to within a few decimal places.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is the deep reality of what is beginning to emerge in physics.
Yeah.
This is the deep reality of some of the crimes, the most brutal, horrible, mind-boggling crimes that we saw in the last century. Don't be deceived by the language, people. What you are looking at is the old practice of human sacrifice as a magical act.
Yeah.
That's what you are seeing.
Yeah.
Whether you call it abortion or Holocaust or, gulag, what have you, this is the reality of it. This is the basis of it. And it brings us to something that we have discussed before, GeorgeAnn, in these sessions, and that is the Cosmic War. You know, the series that we did to begin with that was based more or less on my book by that name.
Yeah.
Well, I've got more books coming out that I am, you know, kind of pursuing that scenario after that war. All right.
Yes.
And as a part of my model of reading ancient texts, trying to figure out the meaning and activities that are taking place in very, very ancient times before the so-called great civilizations appear, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and India, and so on and so forth, you still see and detect the activities of an elite. You will be mind-boggled when you see these activities in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men when it comes out.
Yeah.
You have elites, 2 surviving elites from that war. Both of them know this, so to speak, magical physics. In other words, this doctrine of social engineering or social alchemy, whatever you wish to call it, in both its benign forms and its very, very dark black form. Both elites preserved that knowledge. What I am suggesting to you, therefore, is that we need look no further than the possible activity of one or the other of these elites whenever we see the wholesale slaughter of people in the name, here's the key word, in the name of an ideology. Be it Christianity with the Inquisition, Jihad with the Muslims, Holocaust with the Nazis, Gulag with the Communists, and on it goes. Look deeper than the names. Spot the commonality of activity, and look at the fact that the activity has continued all this time.
Oh, my goodness.
It's gone on for millennia.
Well,
and there are people behind it.
Oh, yeah.
You may think that I'm talking the wildest sorts of nonsense. You may think that I've gone totally round the bend, but I put it to you this way. Even if you don't believe in this connection between, let's call it the Hindu connection, because it's essentially a kind of modern physics dressed up version of some very, very old Hindu doctrines, all right?
Yes.
If you don't believe that any of this is true, the problem is that there are people who do.
Yeah.
And who act upon it. You need look no further than the Kennedy assassination to see it, if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You need look no further. Making sense?
Yes, and this is why, once again, that people that push religious doctrine, they push philosophical doctrine.
Yes.
Doctrine.
Right.
Getting people to believe in this cause or that cause. Persuasion. It's all about this magical social engineering.
Yes, it is. The ultimate purpose of it is to create power over the mind.
Yes.
And therefore over the physical medium itself. In other words, it is another way of engineering it. It is another way of engineering it.
Yeah.
Now, why are we calling this then the Philosopher's Stone and the magic of social engineering? It's very simple. If you go to alchemical texts, there is an exoteric alchemy where you're actually trying to make, and I mentioned this in the very first part of this series.
Mm-hmm.
There's an exoteric alchemy which is concerned with the actual production of an actual philosopher's stone that actually turns base metals into gold. Okay,
yeah.
You know, that's the standard stuff. All right,
yeah.
But there is also an esoteric alchemy where you are attempting to turn the base metal of man into an enlightened being. All right?
Yeah.
Now, most alchemy takes that in the good sense. All right?
Mm-hmm.
But like any other science, what you're dealing with here, and I want to stress this, whether you believe alchemy is a science or not, just assume for the moment that there are those, again, who believe it is. All right?
Yes.
Those people, if they view it as a science, they view it as a method, a technique. In other words, as something morally neutral.
Yeah.
And this is why alchemy stresses that the alchemist himself must be pure, must be good. All right?
Yeah.
But there are those who will take the technique and follow what esotericism calls the left path.
Oh, yeah.
Or the black path.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And it's important to understand that when we are looking at the activities behind the scenes, I mean, my word, GeorgeAnn, you need look no further than Nazi Germany.
Oh, yes.
And see behind the scenes, behind the colorful parades and all the flags and all the people and all of the geometric patterns going on as they march around and beat their drums and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. You need look no further than the activity of some very, very dark secret societies and fraternities that helped midwife the Nazi Party into existence and that continued their doctrines inside of the SS at the highest levels of the SS after the Nazis took power.
Yeah.
You need look no further than that to see the esoteric, if you will, the alchemical justification, at least in their minds, for committing these absolutely horrible crimes. And you can do the same if you dig long and hard enough and scratch and sniff long enough. You can find some very interesting backgrounds on some of the early Bolshevik leaders as well.
Oh, yeah.
Their atheism was contrived. Mm-hmm. Particularly, I think, in the case of people like Lenin and Trotsky, you know, some of the very, very early ones.
Yes.
But you have to look deeply at these things. And again, I'm suggesting that if we look at the pattern of ideological slaughters, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, whatever it may be, scratch and sniff long and hard enough, GeorgeAnn, and you will find at some point prior to the initiation of those activities, you will find the activity and action of a secret society or fraternity setting up the institutions that will be conducting these pogroms.
Oh, gee.
And I will go on record and say it is very difficult to find any exception to this. So in other words, I'm also telling you that there is here another connection that I did not explore in Babylon's Banksters, but yet, you know, I assumed my model of two surviving elites from that cosmic war, the good guys and the bad guys elites. Well, in my mind, there's your origin of the esoteric tradition, that you have two brotherhoods, the White Brotherhood, the Black Brotherhood. In my much more prosaic reading, you have two surviving elites.
Yeah.
But the activities themselves, if you know what you're looking at, if you know that you're looking at magical black workings, alchemical workings,
yes,
to create a shocked passive condition in a group, if you know that, if you know what to look for, then you can pretty much decipher these kinds of activities. And if you know what you're looking at in terms of the benign social engineering, this dialectical splitting of issues, and then once they get split, they get entangled with nonsense.
Yeah.
So that you freeze, you shock, you introduce yet another shock into the system, so that nothing gets done, nothing moves forward. If you know what you're looking at, if you can see deeply, then you can take the appropriate action.
Which would be?
Well, again, as I say, this is all about the culture. You see, that's why I keep stressing this.
Okay.
That's why I keep stressing this. Because this has an effect in a group consciousness, and that in turn spills over into the culture. Follow me?
Yes.
And that always has deep, long-term effects. One of the things I try and point out in my new Kennedy book is that the Kennedy assassination literally, and you were alive at the time, GeorgeAnn, I was alive at the time, we both know that this country is different in a very dark way as a result of that event.
Yeah, it was a coup.
It was a coup, but it had an effect on the consciousness, on the culture.
Yes.
A deep one. It was, and the reason why is you've got to start thinking of it in a sense much deeper than just a political coup.
Yeah.
It was that, absolutely. And it was a very deeply thought coup, and it was a very complex structure behind it. That's one of the things I try and probe in this book is, okay, everybody says it's a conspiracy, but what kind? What was its actual structure?
Well, look at 9/11.
Well, again, yes.
Yeah.
There you have another clearly magical working at work, because what are the Twin Towers? They're the twin Masonic towers that you would find in any Blue Lodge of craft masonry, of Joachim and Boaz.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they were. And if you really want to get detailed about this, you can find all sorts of symbolisms in those buildings that were deliberately built into them that are of an esoteric nature. So in other words, whoever committed that, I'm one of those that certainly thinks it wasn't a bunch of
Arabs,
Muslim terrorists.
Yeah.
It ran much deeper than that.
Oh, yes.
Because of the symbolisms involved. This was a strike at a symbol, not just a financial symbol, but at a deep cultural, magical symbol in this country. It was a strike at the representation, the fraternal and esoteric representation of the elite that's been behind it from the beginning.
Yeah.
So in other words, it was someone, this is why I part company with the 9/11 truthers, is because they're saying that this was a strike by radical, out-of-control elements within our own government.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? No, it was not. If it were, they would not have struck in the way they did. This was a strike from outside. This was another hidden elite taking direct aim at our own, in my opinion. But the effect is the same. The magical social engineering of it was the same. Mm-hmm. It was to produce a certain effect in the American psyche, in the American culture.
Yes.
Okay? If we start looking at things in this way, excuse me, much of our dilemmas, I think, will be solved. Because, again, it means owning the culture. And by owning the culture, I do not mean taking it over in the name of some religion.
Yes.
That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean literally creating the culture. That's what I mean. Writing music, writing poetry, and making it kind of a, for want of a better expression, a beatnik culture,
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say make it a subculture, but that's what I mean. It's something that survives and proliferates and spreads underneath the veneer of what we call culture in this country.
Joseph, suppose that something really horrific happens. The web bots have come out with the date of November 14th. Mm-hmm. Well, suppose something horrific happens on November 14th. How are people to react?
Well, first of all, I react right now by saying, not necessarily I don't believe it, but I don't adopt it as a worldview. I think good thoughts.
Okay.
And if you're the praying sort, pray them. And if you're not the praying sort, think them. As far as I'm concerned, the effect is pretty much one and the same, all right? Mm-hmm. Because, again, it is this interface between consciousness and the medium, all right? I mean, my word, GeorgeAnn, we have serious theoretical physicists, Walker, Frank Tipler, writing books on this stuff. I mean, they even put their equations in these books.
Yeah.
I mean, this is getting pretty serious stuff, folks. But, when I hear rumors of that sort taking place or going on, I simply ignore them, GeorgeAnn, by deliberate, intended act. Mm-hmm. In other words, in a certain sense, in a certain sense, I guess you could say I'm practicing a kind of counter magic.
Yeah.
I do not let these rumor mongering, the rapture is going to come any day, or there's going to be a terrible catastrophe in 2012, or we've heard this all along.
Yeah.
And the only thing that it does is it increases the fear factor.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And that in turn again has that group multiplier consciousness effect.
Well, it's contagious.
It becomes, in other words, and this is important for people to understand. If there is a group consciousness effect on the physical medium, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
If you keep looking for and expecting to find this stuff, you probably will.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that simple. And if you don't look for it and don't expect to find it, you probably won't. Again, we're back to where I began this. We're back to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. If you're looking for the position of the electron, you'll probably find it. And if you're looking for the velocity, you'll probably find that too. But you got to take a choice, one or the other.
Yeah.
You got to take a choice. And we're human. We all get into these snits of depression and so on, and gloom and doom. That's when the rubber really meets the road.
Yes.
Because you have to keep your mind and your heart focused on deeply good things. Beautiful things. On love.
That's true. That's exactly true. And, tonight I went over and sat with my neighbors.
Uh-huh.
And they've built a big bonfire, and they're all sitting out there laughing and talking.
Yeah, I've been down there. I've seen their bonfire. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and just like there's not a care in the world, and yet every one of them are aware of this very negative kind of
Of course,
thing.
of course.
And yet they don't give it verbiage. They don't give it credence.
They don't let it in.
Yeah.
They don't let it. That's exactly so.
They don't
now,
let it in. That's
you
very
don't let
well
it in.
said.
You don't let it in, and then on top of that, you create good things, beautiful things, loving things.
Well, you know, I got an email from somebody, and it said, you know, with all this stuff that's going on in the world, GeorgeAnn, you are not informing us. You are, you know, it was very negative.
Well, there is a place for informing, but...
Well, I suggested that they listen to Alex Jones.
Yeah, well, yes, you know, there is certainly a place for informing people. But there's a difference between being informed and peddling fear.
Yes.
And there's a difference between being informed and giving into the fear.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Once you know, this is the other aspect and I'm glad you brought this up, because we need to talk about this too. This is the other aspect of these alchemical, magical workings of social engineering. Because one of the things that Hoffman points out in his book is that it becomes a part of the design of the magical act to openly parade and release the information that it was a conspiracy and get away with it. You follow me?
Yeah.
So in other words, to a certain extent, they've already factored in the reaction of conspiracy researchers as amplifying effects on their magical act. Do you follow me?
Yes, I do.
Okay? So in other words, one of the things that conspiracy researchers or alternative journalists like Alex Jones or, you know, whoever else you might listen to that's in that genre, one of the things you have to understand is that these people may not be aware of the fact that they are unintentionally helping further these goals.
The agenda, yeah.
The agenda. By creating a climate of passivity and fear.
Well, fear is contagious.
Fear is contagious, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, it's much easier to transmit fear. This is why than it is to transmit good, beautiful, loving things. This is why owning the culture is so important.
Yeah.
This is exactly why it is so very important. When you have things to anchor the mind, you know, and to a certain extent, art and poetry and music are like magical charms, or to a certain extent, like talismans, if you will.
Yeah. Because
they can help anchor the mind and the heart in something other than fear. You know me, GeorgeAnn. I'm a big Bach lover, and I even like the Daddy Bach too.
Yeah.
You know, that's a little inside joke, but anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, one of the reasons I listen to these composers, Bach and Mozart and Handel and so on and so forth, or even some contemporary groups, is that some of this music has the quality to center you.
Oh, yes.
And rewire, and they've proven this, more or less scientifically by doing experiments on how people raised around a lot of classical music, their mind is wired differently.
Yes.
It's wired very, very differently than people who've not grown up around it.
Yes.
And this isn't to say that, that means that one class of people that listens to a certain kind of music is more intelligent than the other. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that the thought processes are centered slightly differently.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make one more intelligent than the other. No, that's not what I'm saying. It just means the thought process is different. So, this is why owning the culture is so very important. It may not seem like a big deal to anybody that I would propose something so nonsensical, because at first hearing it does sound that way.
Yeah.
But when you understand what you're up against, and when you understand that what you're up against has been doing what it's been doing for millennia.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh.
For millennia.
Well, it works. That's why they don't change their...
That's why they don't change.
Yeah. Oh,
that's why they don't change. Own the culture. I'm not saying, don't be informed. I would be contradicting myself if I said don't be involved politically. At whatever level you choose to be involved politically,
yeah,
be involved. But don't let it center you. This is the other problem in this country right now. Politics has become the center, and we wonder why we're losing our culture. You see?
Yes. Oh my goodness, Joseph.
Now, it is a huge task ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
It is a huge task ahead of us. And like it or not, we are living on the cusp of tremendous, exciting things.
Oh, yes.
That are going to be coming out of the world of physics in the next 50 to 100 years. If we don't lay the foundations for our children and grandchildren now,
yeah,
then when those things do come out, they could be used for some very, very bad things. I've been all along saying that this is a wonderful physics and it will bring a lot of good things, but it has a tremendous downside.
Yeah.
Okay? And what I'm trying to do is, pardon me, what I'm trying to do with this series of talks is kind of let as much out of the bag as I dare.
Yeah.
To help people understand what they're looking at and how to react to it.
Well, like the Rwandan genocide.
Any genocide.
Yeah.
Any genocide, if you scratch and sniff long enough, is an act of human sacrifice.
Yes. Yes, it is.
It is an act, let me put it very bluntly, I don't care what your religion is, what book you're using to cite your authority to go out and slaughter people, or what God has, beamed moonbeams into your brain and told you to go out and kill somebody and you'll inherit paradise.
Oh, gee.
I just really don't care. And basically, you find that kind of activity at some point in their histories going on in all three of the great monotheistic religions.
Yes.
All right? I don't care what your justification is. The ultimate purpose is always magical.
Yeah.
Always. Bar none. Now, you can get angry at me and, send Bible verses or verses from this or verses from that. I don't particularly care because, excuse me, ultimately, the practice is black magic. The practice is a twisted form of alchemical social engineering. That's all it is. That's all it's ever been.
Oh, gee. Oh, Joseph. I think their jig is up. You've let the genie out of the bottle.
Well, it's not me. I mean, I'm not the one releasing the genie out of the bottle. There have been other, certainly more capable scholars of the esoteric than I that have pointed these things out before.
Yeah.
In some very academic works, as a matter of fact. But what they have not pointed out, that I am pointing out, is this deep connection, excuse me, between these activities and this physics.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to get through to people is that this very ancient high civilization that, in my opinion, once spanned this solar system, had possession of this deep, unified science. And I'm saying science because I want people to understand that this was a highly unified view. It was virtually impossible to disentangle the physics from the philosophy, from the religion, from the spirituality. It wasn't a big jumbled mess at all. It was all coming out of this transmutative nature that they knew that the physical medium was.
Yes.
All right? That's where it's all coming out of. And since they knew what we are now rediscovering through quantum mechanics and some other things going on in physics, even in biology, some interesting studies in sociology, and so on, they knew that there was this deep connection between consciousness and the medium. All right? This is where the ancientness of human sacrifice or other bloody sacrifices begins.
Oh.
Because you see, out of traumatized emotions,
Yes.
And the more you can amplify that effect, if you are of evil inclination,
Yeah.
then the more powerful the magical working will become.
Oh, gee.
Now, it is, I have been trying to warn people in our sessions that there are some real nasty implications to some of this, and there are some real good ones. And I have hinted at them quite strongly in this session tonight.
Yes.
But again, this is the basis. This is the foundation for why I have been saying in so many of the sessions, own the culture. And again, I want to reiterate, I am not saying go out and capture the culture for Jesus or Mohammed or... No. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying be creative. Be creative. And I'm very serious about that.
Yes.
Create beauty.
Loveliness, kindness.
Yes, create it. Create it.
Civility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite activities, about once a week, I pull off one of my favorite little volumes of poetry here, and I'll just sit and read it. I'll read it out loud because I like to hear it.
Yes.
Now that's a very trivial little activity, but it helps center me.
Yeah.
Given the stuff that I write about, it helps to keep oneself centered in something happy.
Yes, exactly.
But and I compose, and that's one of the reasons that I compose and listen to music and so on and so forth. It helps center me. And I hope my little compositions have blessed the people I've shared them with,
Yeah.
But there are so many people out there with creative talent languishing because they think they have to get on American Idol to display it.
Oh my gosh.
But you see, that in itself is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about making a big cultural splash from the top down.
Yeah.
After you go through all the corporate vetting process to find out if what you're going to do is acceptable.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Let me put it to you this way, GeorgeAnn. Can you imagine authors today, in today's climate, authors like Charles Dickens, or Lawrence Stern, or Oscar Wilde, or even Shakespeare? Can you imagine authors like that trying to get their work out from a major publishing house in this country?
Oh my gosh!
Can you picture the scene?
Yes.
Of Charles Dickens trying to sell A Christmas Carol to Simon and Schuster. Can you picture that scene?
Oh yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Can you picture the scene of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart trying to get a couple of his piano concerti recorded by Sony?
Oh my God!
Who incidentally make millions of dollars off of recording Mozart's piano concerto. But if he were alive today, can you see him trying to put on Don Giovanni on Broadway?
Oh my gosh!
You see what I'm saying?
Oh yes.
These men did not make big splashes in their lives. They created. J.S. Bach, to me, is and his son Carl Philipp are two of the greatest composers that have ever lived, and they lived 300 years ago. And they created the splash in their music largely by word of mouth.
Yes.
Largely by word of mouth. But yet, by the time each man had died, their fame had spread all over the continent, and in fact, across C.P. Bach's fame had spread across the ocean, and even George Washington had heard and played his music.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if nothing,
can we imagine?
If nothing else, Joseph, do it in the park.
Yes, exactly.
Set it up in a school gymnasium or on a street corner.
Exactly. A friend of mine has very musical sons.
Yes. And
I heard one of them play his music on the guitar for me.
Mm.
And I was dumbfounded what I was hearing.
Oh.
And excuse me.
Yes.
I told him, I said, you should be playing this in public.
Yeah.
Go to a coffee house or something, and play this in public.
All these things are set up in associations, and
yes,
you have to pass their approval.
Yes,
and
exactly.
It's very political process.
Of course it is, because why, GeorgeAnn? This is my point. Why is it a political process?
To keep
it's a political process
talent.
It's a political process because these elites know the importance of culture.
Yes.
They know the importance of cultural symbols.
Yes.
And their approach to genius is always one of two things. If the genius will succumb to the corporate mold and the general cultural milieu, then he's okay.
Yeah.
But if he won't, you lock him out.
Yeah.
All right?
And that has happened to thousands and thousands.
Oh, of course it has.
People.
And the same thing, I keep talking about the public consumption physics and then the real stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, it's the same sort of activity. You have these priesthoods in power. I don't care if it's in religion or if it's in science or if it's in philosophy or if it's in literature or whatever.
Yeah.
You have these priesthoods in power whose sole purpose is to vet ideas and people.
Yes.
To see who can maintain the cultural status quo.
Oh, yeah.
Because, again, do we want this physics getting out and having an implication for... And trust me, folks, there's whoppingly huge implications of this physics for things as simple as music.
Yes. And
the musical system that we have. Okay? There are so many connections to this stuff. Do we want anything like real music to get out? I mean, look at how they have taken us down a path of the decline of Western music.
Oh, yes. Oh.
You know, up to about the mid-1990s, I could stomach most contemporary music, and I even really liked a lot of it.
Yeah.
Okay? I hear the stuff now, and it's noise.
Yeah, it is.
You know, that's why when my friend's son was playing this music, I thought, geez, where's this stuff coming from? You know, it's certainly not coming from the corporate stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, people ask me what kind of music do I write. Well, I write in a deliberately chosen historical voice. I write in 18th century style for a reason. Number one, I like it. But number two, it's deliberately archaic. It can express beautiful things and structures in a way that contemporary forms cannot.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that its utility is good for everything. It isn't. You know? But I don't care what genre it is, own the culture.
Absolutely.
The elites understand its importance.
Yeah.
Trust me, they do. Trust me, they do. That's why they want to own it.
Yeah.
You see? Why do you think the Rockefeller Foundation gives so much money away to sponsor this or that artist or this or that struggling author or what have you? It's because they want a certain cultural imagery out there.
Yeah. Yep.
So, push back.
Oh, push back, push back.
Yeah,
Big
push
time.
back. Push back.
Oh, Joseph. You are certainly enlightening people, and
I hope so.
It's a godsend. It really is.
I hope so.
Oh.
I hope so.
Oh.
And please don't take away from this that what I'm saying is that you must like Mozart or Bach or Oscar Wilde or Charles Dickens or William Shakespeare or what have you to be cultured. No, no, no. I'm saying create. If you don't like those guys, go out and create your own.
Darn right. Yes.
But make sure that it is grounded in this perception, this conscious, deliberate perception that there is a direct interface between consciousness and the physical medium.
Oh, yes.
And therefore create things of goodness and beauty. And, if I may put it this way, gentleness and love.
Yes. Well spoken. Very well spoken. Joseph P. Farrell, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me back, GeorgeAnn, especially on such short notice.
Oh. You have a special insight into things and a way of making it understandable to people. This medium that you're talking about operates 24/7.
24/7, every second of our lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we can add to the good and beautiful side, or we can add to the vicious
Absolutely.
and deadly side.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Joseph, thank you.
Thank you, GeorgeAnn.
Very much. And everybody, visit GizaDeathStar.com. That's Joseph P. Farrell's website. There is a PayPal button there. Make use of it.
And please help GeorgeAnn too, folks. Please do. These radio shows are expensive to produce, and I know she works so hard to produce these shows. So please help GeorgeAnn.
Thank you, Joseph.
Oh, my pleasure.
And we will be back with more. Everybody, this ends part 4 of The Philosopher's Stone, The Magic of Social Engineering. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
The Byte Show is listener supported at thebyteshow.com.